Wireless LAN Professionals Podcast, episode 122.
Wireless LAN Professionals is a place to educate, inform, encourage, and entertain those involved in wireless LANs. This Wireless LAN Professionals podcast is an audio manifestation of these goals. Our host is a wireless LAN veteran, consultant, designer, and teacher, Keith Parsons. And now, the podcast for wireless LAN professionals by wireless LAN professionals.
Welcome again to Wireless LAN Professionals Podcast. GT, how are you doing?
Good, sir. Thank you for having me.
So what's GT stand for?
Oh, man. I can't tell people that until we're
I know, but I figure if I ask, everyone will hear your answer.
It is Gene Thomas. That's, Gene is kind of I'm trying to rebrand myself to be less nerdy, so I dropped the Gene.
So you're GT instead. But everyone knows you as GT, so, you can't change that now.
No, I know. I changed it 9 years ago, and then you always get these legacy people that like you guys that call me Gene, which is fine. It's okay. But GeneHill.com wasn't available. GT was, so you kind of go where the branding can go.
Sometimes that's all it takes in life is one little trigger, and then the whole trajectory changes. Well, we are here with you today. You happen to be home in Arkansas. I'm in Utah, so that's the miracle of technology. We get to talk together.
Yeah, it's a miracle I have electricity here too, so I'm very thankful.
Well, that's always a good thing. So we're not going to talk about your missile silo, but what's the link if someone wants to go and follow along on your journey?
Oh, they can see the videos and such if they just go to dwbs.video. That stands for Death Bunny Slippers.video. And thanks for letting me plug that, Keith. I appreciate it.
Oh, no. You got some funny ones. I love the one where the last view as you're walking away with like 20 guns wrapped around you. Yeah, you're all ready for a battle there for sure.
Exactly.
I don't know if you could climb any stairs, but you're ready. Yeah. Well, if you want a good laugh, that's a good one to go watch. What's the episode? Does it have an episode number or something on it?
No, it's just called America.
America. Well, we're here, and today we're going to talk about a couple things. One, sometimes we get to where we are in life through some weird decisions and history. So I was wondering if you could kind of share us your history of how you got into Wi-Fi and your path all the way to now with Nyansa, and then we'll end up talking a little bit about how wireless LAN professionals, people who use Wi-Fi in an enterprise, could use Nyansa to help them do their job better.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Well, tell us about your beginnings in Wi-Fi.
Yeah, so beginnings in Wi-Fi. I grew up in the middle of nowhere, Oregon. After I lived in Washington State. After I spent some requisite time as an MCSE, which you have to be if you live in Washington State. My high school buddy said, "Hey, I need to get internet out here." So this was about 2001, and so we built our own antennas. He needed to get a point-to-point to a guy with a T1, so we used D-Link cards, soldered some wire and some RPTNCs or whatever the heck we were using back then, and made a point-to-point shot. And I remember very distinctly being on a phone, was trying to explain to me the difference between DBI and DBD. That's when DBD was still used a lot in the Wi-Fi industry, and I couldn't get it. I didn't understand it. So that's where I started my journey, and then eventually, got certified, did a lot of training with Global Knowledge, some consultant work, and then in 2009 started working with Ruckus as a vendor, working for a vendor. So that's the quick history of my life as a Wi-Fi guy.
Well, good. Well, continue on. So Ruckus as a vendor, what was your role there? It was obviously still in Wi-Fi.
It was, yeah. So my role there was, I was pretty early on, especially I was in the marketing side. So they wanted a tech guy that could talk, and as most people who know me know that I love to hear myself talk. Beginning was training, so I did a bunch of training videos for internal and external use. I was the evangelist, so I would go around and be the face of Ruckus, which is not always a good thing, but that's so that was my main role at Ruckus. And then towards the end, I was director of product and tech marketing, and Ruckus got a little bit big for me because I'm kind of a small company guy, and left, and in December of 2015 joined Nyansa, which is where I'm at today.
Well, nice little path there. Along the way, obviously CBNE, 21 or something?
21, blackjack, baby.
Yeah. Oh, I even remembered that for some reason.
Yeah.
And in addition to having a missile silo, you also had a little studio you shot a lot of videos in, your little training studio. I liked that you had, what was that, TriCaster at the time?
Yeah, I've since sold that because it was a standard definition only. But yeah, had a TriCaster. I had a whole building that Ruckus paid for me to build so I could shoot videos. We would fly people into here to Arkansas and do training videos and other kind of nifty things. My studio now is moved into the missile silo, mainly because it's just easier and it's always cool down there. So if you're running lights, all the lights are LED now, but if the lights are hot, you always need a way to cool it. And so being downstairs in there, it's a good place to have a studio.
So you're a video personality, not just on a podcast.
Yeah, again, however I can distribute myself to inflate my ego is perfect for me. So I like that. I like the video thing as well.
Oh, so you still have? So is that where you shoot your Death with Bunny Slippers?
Yeah, we do. There's two different sets down there actually. So there's the Death Wears Bunny Slippers, and then there's a different set right next to it that's Nyansa Purple. So that's I do those kind of videos. I also shoot videos. I have a class that it's one of those that I just need to do more of. But I have a class on Udemy.com. It's RF. I call it RF for Wi-Fi administrators. So it's not it's not the ham radio side or any of that, but it's kind of an RF class for that. So I don't remember where I shot that video at. I think it was in the main building at one point.
Well, I have watched it, and it does cover some very good concepts. So if anyone wants to get some RF basics on Udemy, I don't know if you make a lot of money off that. Udemy's a pretty cheap place to go get some training.
It is. Well, it's I don't know. I don't think any of us are going to get rich doing that little videos, but yeah, it's something fun to do.
Well, then it's good to get people up to speed. Well, thanks for your little recap of how you got to here with Nyansa. So as a wireless professional, people who are babysitting, either small, medium business, enterprise class systems, how can Nyansa help them?
Yeah, I think the thing that Nyansa would most definitely have not been a successful product 20 years ago. If we could port it back and make it work. And the reason was 20 years ago, everybody was mostly wired. Things were just a lot less nebulous than they are today. But today, of course, we have the whole mobile devices, and Wi-Fi is, some high digit percentage of the connections that people use. And there's just no visibility into the user experience. And that's what Voyance is that where you have a network management or monitoring system, which we don't replace. We're not trying to be a Cisco Prime or Airwave or SolarWinds replacement, that you can see the network kind of from the top down. The analogy I've kind of thought up lately is it's kind of like looking at the weather on planet Earth by only looking at it through a satellite. So if there's a hurricane and something really bad is happening, you know it. If it's sunny, you know it. But that doesn't give you the experience of what is each person on the ground experiencing. Is the wind blowing? Is it hot? Is it cold? That's harder to figure out from a distance. So that's why what Voyance is doing, Nyansa's product called Voyance, is we're looking at what is the user experiencing, and we deliver that information in what we think are pretty interesting ways to the IT departments from, the NOC and service desk level all the way up to the CIO.
So the install of this pretty lightweight, just kind of straps on the side.
Yeah, and that's I'm a marketing guy, so you guys can trust me for a little bit, I guess, but not much. It typically, so I've installed a number of these myself. You physically rack it in. There's 2 ports. We have to have something local because we want to see all the traffic. That's probably the worst part about Voyance is that we need to see a lot of traffic off the wired and wireless network. So we take a span off of it locally. But the physical installation and setup is, I can do an install today in 30 minutes. A more complicated installation with more spans and such may take an hour. But yeah, it's generally pretty straightforward to install.
That's amazingly fast for something that's going to be that kind of insight. So this is a podcast, obviously audio only. We're not getting nice graphics that Voyance can show. But walk us through a report that a wireless guy might want to look at if, let's say, a customer complains about, the Wi-Fi is slow. That's all they tell you.
Yeah, that's I love that one. The Wi-Fi is slow. Well, number one, so when you look at it, so Voyance has really, I would say, 3 different views. One is the individual user view. So if I want to see what you, Keith, are experiencing today, I type in your name and I get to see what you're experiencing. So Voyance automatically keeps a history of your experience because we want to answer some questions. One, is this the only time you've ever had this problem, or is it repetitive? But then it also is the other question that service desk people or help desk people often ask is anyone else having the same problem? And then you get this, hey, is anybody else having a problem with the Wi-Fi? What Voyance does is it actually tells you that on the screen. It says, hey, you're one of 30 on the access point having an issue. Or sorry, one of 30 on the AP, and oh, by the way, 25 other people are having the same problem. So that is something that very quickly you can say it's an isolated incident, or it's something that is a little bit more pervasive.
So what level of granularity? So you can obviously drill down to an individual user. Is there also groupings? You mentioned per AP. Is there also per site or other ways to group those error messages so you can kind of see how big the problem is?
Yeah, absolutely. It goes by, you can do it by site, also by access point group. And so we pull the group information from your controller, or you can do custom groups. So there's a ton of capabilities there. But the idea is that, if you're a service desk person, one user, that's your job to work on it and get them fixed up. But as a network ops person, you're more concerned with the bigger picture. So Voyance combines all the user experience, and to your question, it can combine it by site, by company, by AP group, by building, however you want to separate it. It can say, hey, this building is having good Wi-Fi performance, or you may get an alert that says, hey, this building is having poor Wi-Fi performance. So we determine Wi-Fi, good or bad, versus a baseline. So a baseline is how bad normally you have it. So that's based on a percentage of users that face a problem. So we could say, hey, normally 5% of people have Wi-Fi problems. Today, 20% are. That's something really different. Here's what we see as that problem. Here's where it's isolated to. And here's what we recommend to do to fix it. Voyance also has this thing we call root cause analysis built in to try to help narrow that problem down.
Are some of the other categories like OS version, as in iOS versus Android, or also version of code on your APs? Can we check to see all 8.2s are having an issue, but the old 8.1s were fine?
Yeah, we kind of take what we call the cloud. People think of the cloud as a place for storage and remote processing, but Voyance actually compares customers to each other. Now we do this in the same vertical, so we wouldn't compare, Tesla manufacturing to a university in the Northeast. That's not something good, but we compare that. And what we do is, back to your question, Keith, is we can look at that and say, hey, there's a higher than normal percentage of problems on this version of controller code. Or when Apple releases a new version of iOS, if there was a really distinct problem that, let's say something that isn't Wi-Fi, let's say it's DHCP, maybe it's not doing DHCP very efficiently, Voyance would say, hey, DHCP is not happening efficiently. It's happening with all iOS devices. And by the way, they're all on this version. So it does exactly what you had asked, which is this way to correlate seemingly difficult things to do. It's normally difficult to correlate those things, but it does it all built in.
So let's talk about data points. I mean, everyone mentions big data, and by that, I don't ever know what they really mean by big. But when you talk about big data, what kind of volume of data points do you have after a year and a half or so of being in business? Or is it longer than a year and a half?
It's been about a year and a half actually since we started rolling Voyance out to the public. Some interesting data points is I think we're tracking about 3 million client devices or so. I haven't looked at the latest, but tens of thousands of access points. And then there's all that historical information that comes with it. So we also track what I think are interesting Wi-Fi things like band steering. For example, we could tell you what percentage of your 5 gig capable devices are actually being band steered. Is that a word? But yes, it's actually having themselves band steered.
Yeah, but they make steers with bands as well. But that's a different topic. Some people got that. So how would you characterize that as across the board with your tens of thousands of APs and millions of clients? What is the percentage of, give us some interesting, cool data like what you see on 5 gig band steering across the board rather than, per vendor or something.
So I'm looking at a university right now that has 92% of their devices are 5 gigahertz capable. Of those 5 gigahertz capable, 77% of them are on 5 gigahertz at the time that I'm looking at this. So this is, basically real-time data. So that means, 77% of the dual band devices have been band steered, leaving, of course, 23% on the 2.4 side.
So the 23% of the people are getting punished for not having good drivers.
It could be that.
Worse data than they would have had they been on the correct frequency.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I can look at different customers though, and very quickly start to assess if they have some Wi-Fi issues. Just from these kind of statistics, I can look at AP densities as, for example, how many clients are connected on average to an access point. So you'll find that as you already know, that your better organizations have fewer devices per AP, or more importantly, per channel.
Is there any way to get our co-channel interference, co-channel contention number out of Voyance?
From what respect? Like a number?
What percentage of APs see other APs on the same channel above some threshold? It's kind of a weird question, but it's
a good question. No, it's a question. It's actually, that's on a roadmap, because that's one nice thing about me being a Wi-Fi guy at an analytics company is we go in and say, hey, look, this would be a really interesting number. So we have a beta feature right now called the recommendation engine, which shows kind of a data scientist topology of all. It's almost like an RF topology. What access points can see each other? Which ones can't? How are they grouped? And you can, mess with all of it, and it kind of makes a neat little diagram. But the feature that I asked, to go into production was, a little checkbox that says, show me co-channel interference. And then again, where that feature eventually will go is from a map perspective, is that, all those access points are on a map, so you can see your co-channel interference. But as we know, CCI is dynamic because the vendors tend to, people have dynamic channel changes.
Well, I would make a suggestion if you have the granularity. Co-channel contention only should exist between the primary and the secondary APs in any location, because hopefully the clients are on one of the top 2 strongest APs. And so if you have co-channel interference with the 3rd, 4th, or 5th, then they're really interfering because no one's using them at that location. But that's highly location sensitive. Sometimes we think of CCI as just anytime any 2 APs see each other above some threshold. But if no clients are using it there, then that's not a bad place.
No, you make actually a great point. I was actually just having this discussion the other day. We have customers that have, warehouses, and if you go into that diagram from a co-channel interference perspective, it's a huge glob of, connectivity between all of these between all these APs. Not connectivity, but that they can hear each other. They're within the same RF area. But if there's not a lot of traffic, CCI is just more traffic. CCI itself isn't bad. It's when you start adding the traffic to it that starts to really exponentially get worse.
Yeah, at the last WPC in Lisbon, Peter McKenzie gave a talk on he loves CCI because by definition it is how Wi-Fi works. That's just the way it works. So, well, any other cool data points like what percentage of Wi-Fi problems aren't?
Yeah, no, that's interesting. So I would say an interesting tidbit that we've learned is that Wi-Fi is the number 1 problematic area, which is, it kind of hurts as Wi-Fi people, but it's to be expected. But the second worst is ARP. Of all the DHCP, DNS, Radius, the second worst problem that we see on networks today is ARP. And what we mean by an ARP problem is that there's a request that goes out and there is no response from the gateway. Because again, we're looking at all aspects of this communication and we see that the client never got response. Some customers that may be down to 0.5 to 1% of all of their ARP traffic fails. But some of it, we'll see every once in a while. I have one in front of me now that has like 40 to 50% of all of their ARP traffic fails. And that's one of the things you never, at least when I was not a Wi-Fi guy, I never really heard people talking about ARP. It's kind of like breathing in a heartbeat. You just sort of hope and expect it's going to keep working.
Yeah. And so when you say, and I mean like no reply or slow reply?
No, this is no reply. This is not congestion. This is a physical no response.
And it stays there, or is it just temporary?
No, it stays there. In fact, we also break things down like by location within a campus or an enterprise. So we can look at and say, hey, of your entire ARP problem you have, this is the location that you're having the most ARP issues. So that's one of those things that I would say that early on, people always know that they have problems with their network. This ARP problem is one that they're like, wow, I never thought that I had that.
And what were the kind of I mean, obviously that's the symptom. What was the cause?
I haven't talked to a lot of customers about that, but a lot of it is just, poor routing and switching, that there's something on the wired side, obviously, that's happening on the wired side that's causing these issues. And that's where my knowledge kind of stops. So I apologize for not being.
I know, but just the idea that you could track that and that it's an issue that is on our networks, and we haven't even been looking at the statistics. So we're
giving data in such a way that people don't really. They don't know if it's good or bad. So we have a benchmarks section of that I mentioned earlier, where you can see that if Keith, if you went to the doctor and the doctor said, "Oh, Keith, we did a blood sample and you have a 6." You're like, okay, is that good or bad? The number itself means nothing to you until you're compared to others. So Voyance compares every statistic we have against other organizations, or if you have multiple sites, you can compare site to site. So then you say, oh, okay, my 4% number is actually really good. I'm happy with that. Or, whoa, I'm in the bottom 20th percentile. I definitely should not. I need to address that and put some resources into fixing it.
I wonder if anyone uses that report when they go back to their budgeting office for the next year. We're in the bottom quintile. we should do something about this.
No, it absolutely is. It's one of those double-edged swords that a lot of. Initially, we had some resistance from IT people because they didn't want to, you almost kind of taking your clothes off a little bit and showing the bad to your bosses. Voyance does that. But it also, it helps to do exactly what you said, which is provide third-party data to say, yes, we need to spend resources here. And of course, resellers love us because Voyance actually says, here's where you should go spend money with your client. So that's so they like that part too.
Yeah, that I can see that would be definitely something they would like. Where the name Voyance come from? Sounds a little I don't know, like you're sneaking and looking in your neighbor's house or something.
It is. That's well, you know me long enough, and my boss David Kalish long enough to know that we're a little edgy. So yeah, it came from the word voyeur to look and such. So. So we kind of bounce between the name Voyance and Voyant, and yeah, so that's where we're at. In fact, we have a conference that we're going to do next year called Voyeurs, which is going to be a bunch of people from the industry and our customers and resellers getting together.
So instead of ruckus big dogs, so they're not big dogs, they're voyeurs.
Yep, it's a Nyansa Voyeurs conference.
I know a couple of people would want to go to that conference for other reasons, though. No, not that. I'm thinking they like to collect badges, and that would be a cool badge to hang on your wall. Little get in. Oh, I'm a voyeur, voyeur elite. Have little tags underneath.
Yeah, exactly. The voyeur VIP experience.
So you mentioned earlier that Wi-Fi is the number one problem that you see. Is that RF level Wi-Fi, or just that it's Wi-Fi devices? Since they're the majority of the things on the edge, they get tagged, or is it actual RF issues, or is it just the Wi-Fi devices are the biggest chunk?
As much as the truth is, Keith, as much as I would love to get on here and say, hey, look, it's all the device's fault, we see a lot of what becomes fairly obvious to be poor design decisions, or they're just in an environment that it becomes difficult to implement better Wi-Fi due to lack of resources or whatever it may be.
So is that an RF issue, or is it just the Wi-Fi's are sitting behind a DHCP server that's broken, ends up looking like a Wi-Fi problem?
No, we break that down. It's usually heavy congestion. The AP is heavily congested. The layer 2 retries are higher than, of course, they should be. Those are the kind of statistics where we're saying that's a Wi-Fi problem, because we break out separately to say this is a DHCP problem.
Oh, so when you said number one's Wi-Fi, it's the RF level Wi-Fi. Okay, good.
Now, that could be a client driver. We don't put agents on clients just from from a sales perspective. That's hard to do. They are truly some Wi-Fi related issue, whether it's a client problem or an infrastructure design issue.
So one of the conference, the WPC we just had a couple of weeks ago in Lisbon, Mist was presenting their AI. If once you get enough big data like you've got right now, the ability to not just predict what's going to happen, but perhaps give a recommendation to fix it. If that is, number one problem is Wi-Fi, what kind of recommendations does Voyance give to alleviate those?
We have what we call our recommendation engine. I mentioned that earlier. And inside that recommendation engine, it will say things like, they seem to be kind of obvious, like alleviate co-channel interference on 5 gigahertz. But the way we break it down is we all know that there's no perfect network. Every network, including Wi-Fi, has some sort of an issue. But what Voyance does is it breaks it down into the worst offenders, and we do that by client hours. So Voyance looks at how many client hours is a device active, and then how many of those hours have they had a poor Wi-Fi or, again, any other service experience. So that is where it's kind of like, you rise the cream to the crops. Again, Keith, I know you do a lot of consulting. So you're going to go out to your customer, do the consulting, and you're going to come back with a top 5, top 10 things that they should really do or you should do for them. Voyance does the same thing. Again, we can find that needle in a haystack if you want to, but really taking care of the biggest offenders first is what Voyance is about. Hey, this is the place where you're going to gain the most improvement in your user's experience by doing this.
Do you have customers who've used it for year and a half now, some of the beginning ones, who have seen those numbers drop because of it?
Absolutely. In fact, I would say one of our longer customers, Brandeis University, they let us use their system for a demo, meaning when I demo publicly, they let us use that. But one of the things you see from them, and I would like to say that Voyance had a little bit to do with this, is they have the best Wi-Fi network that we assess in higher ed. So if you do the benchmark comparison of them versus others, they've been a customer for 2+ years, and they happen to be, number one. That's due to, really good people. But we also would like to think that has something to do with Voyance.
Is there any before and afters to get that comparison? Or were they great before they started?
Yeah, I mean, they definitely had a good network before as well. But we have historical data for a year on every customer. I'll say that I have a customer here locally that also a university, and their Wi-Fi network wasn't as good as they wanted it to be. But through a few changes, Voyance, they made some changes. Voyance tracks those changes, by the way. So we've always wondered, hey, if I make my channel sizes 20 or 40, or I shut down low data rates, does that really help? Voyance tracks that. So Voyance does what's called an annotation on the timeline that at this point in time, Keith Parsons said that, hey, we're going to go to 20 megahertz only. And since that time, there has been a 22% improvement in end user performance. So one of the joys for me is to be able to quantify the changes that we normally kind of do from an arts and crafts perspective, trying to use our experience and intuition. Voyance quantifies that. It actually says this is the improvement. Now, what I also love is that you can do this across vendors. So if vendor X comes out and says, hey, we've got a new access point, great, install that in the system, in the live network, and Voyance will tell you if people in that space, that physical area, have better or worse service than they did last time before the change.
I wonder how many resellers want to play that game. I think the customers would like it because they'd end up with a better system.
We've had vendor bake-offs done by customers where they pitted vendors side by side with Voyance doing the assessment.
That's kind of a unique marketing function for a system like yours, but I can see how it would give pretty strong data at that point.
Normally people do like user surveys and stuff, and I've seen that on the EDUCAUSE list lately, where let's do a survey, go around and ask people, and those are just very difficult to get right. That's just, it's not good data.
It would be kind of like going back to MOS scores before you had to actually have them listen. We now have a calculation to give us that score instead. So Voyance is kind of giving you back that metric that's a quantitative metric rather than qualitative, but hopefully reflecting the qualitative in the numbers. So very good. Any like worldwide data on that 20, 40, 80 kind of channel thing that you can share?
The top enterprises we see out there tend to be 20. If I had to give a recommendation off the cuff, I always say 20 megahertz. And I know that goes against the grain for a lot of people. I have a belief that the only reason to have higher channel sizes is budget. I'm going down a non-analytics track here, but we definitely have data that continues to show that your top enterprises are running, a significant portion of them at 20 megahertz. But 40s are out there. I would say, 40, 50% of them are 40 megahertz. And then 80s are basically non-existent. In fact, I'm looking at a little graph right here. We haven't updated this recently, but, Nyansa.com/Voyance Live has some data on it that we compile. And what I'm looking at right now is the top enterprises are 20-40, almost an even split of channelization. But the bottom enterprises out there have 13% of them are running 80 megahertz wide channels. Now, there is, we all, most of us know and don't ever do that. But that is some pretty interesting data to prove our point that 80s are the devil.
A good way. Do you have any stats? The devil. Do you have any stats on MBR, minimum data rate, at 6, 12, 24 kind of thing?
That's not something that we're actively capturing today. We do get that information, but we're not displaying that in the product. But data rates are yet another thing where we're continually adding to. That's one of the things we add on our roadmap, is just pulling in more and more data. But unfortunately, we don't have that today, but that's something we've talked about for sure.
I normally go and check retry rates, average data rate, etc. Do you have any stats on that Voyance Live page on retry rates for the top 20% versus bottom 20%?
No, but we have that data. I could actually pull that data from the back end. Retry rate is the main contributing factor to bad Wi-Fi. And I mean that in a Voyance perspective. When we say someone is having poor Wi-Fi experience, it is directly related to either poor SNR or low data rates, or high retry rates.
Which probably ends up in low data rates too.
Right, exactly. It obviously ends up in low data rates as well. So when I say that, if I say that a customer has 30% of their clients have poor Wi-Fi, that's because 30% of them have excessive retries and low SNR.
Yeah, I just think that those stats like that from a global standpoint might fit in that category of, let me go to my boss and ask for more budget, because if we're in the bottom, 20% on retry rates, that's a fixable thing. And then that also cascades into, all the other issues are caused, and at least we can see those numbers. So I think sharing that, where anyone fits in that, because if you have the statistics that show, those quintiles, and I just can go on site with all sorts of tools and get what my personal data rate, retry rates are, that might be you might want to turn that into some talk at WPC coming up, something like that.
Yeah,
just a hint.
No, absolutely. The data is there. It's just labeled a bit differently than what you're asking. But to come out and say, hey, here's total retry rates percentages across the board, that's definitely something we have stored, and we have that data.
Yeah, make a nice bell curve to find out where you want to be versus your, other people who are doing a good job, where are they at?
And what's reasonable? And what is a reasonable target? That's a good answer, or a good question, because pie in the sky 0% retries aren't going to happen. So what is a number that is valid that I can say, that's good. That's good enough.
Well, and we've been, quoting 5s, 10s around in the industry for a long time, but I would like to see what the actual, out of millions and billions of data points, what a bell curve against those looks like. Maybe 5 is totally, unreasonable, or it's reasonable. I don't know. We've been, it's just anecdotal from all of my customers. You have millions more data points than what's in my head.
Yeah, and the other thing about that then is again, grabbing that data later. And what I mean by that is going out and doing a site search or a packet capture, and then seeing the retry rate. That is just a sliver in time, as you know. And that sliver in time, you could be hitting it on a good day or bad day, or good minute or bad minute. So that's why I think monitoring tools or analytics tools, it's good because then you get real data over time, as opposed to go out there and do an assessment, do a site survey assessment at a specific time of day, and let's hope it's okay.
Yeah, and that snapshot time, could be, it's not always where. A lot of times it's when.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Because again, when we can say, are we going to design for the worst 10% of time? And Voyance lets you do that as well. You can say, I want to see the 90th percentile. I want to see when I'm 90% loaded on my network, 90% of the max I've ever seen, what's my performance? But is that real? Should I look at 90% or 60 or 30 or some other percentage?
And that's a point where if you have that kind of data, you can then talk to management and come up with a discussion about something really interesting, like what's our target versus our budget. At 90% or 80 or 70, you're going to have different budget requirements and be able to have a more intelligent discussion rather than just off the cuff. I think we need to improve.
I think what the Wi-Fi industry has been missing is an ability to constantly measure these things. And we, in the past, we normally would look to vendors to do that. And I think they're a little bit behind now, which is not a dig on them. That's just the way technology is, right? Is you always have these little startups that tend to start pioneering some information, and eventually we'll see some of this kind of functionality from a Wi-Fi vendor or vendors.
Well, if it's successful, vendors like to copy. So I'm glad that Nyansa is out there on the edge, giving us some information we wouldn't have otherwise. Well, any final words here, GT, about your career and or where Nyansa is going? Where
I see things like this technology, even on a customizable basis, we could probably start taking action based on the data. Meaning, if Voyance sees a certain problem, then it will execute a script to go fix a problem, to go solve that problem. That's where technology, this analytics technology is going, is the true self-healing network that I don't think has ever really been, it never has really happened. And that's going to be an interesting shift, but I would see that on a customized basis within 2018, and getting out there more where people will trust analytics to make decisions and solve some problems after that.
The whole RF engineer in a box, we're not in the box yet, but if there's enough data points, maybe they could replicate us. And I'm sure we'll find other work we'd rather do than some of the repetitive pieces.
Voyance doesn't eliminate the need for guys like you and Peter out there in the field and good Wi-Fi people. What it does is it makes your job a lot more efficient. So Voyance is not going to go out there and fix an RF problem, because that you have to have boots on the ground to do that. But it'll tell you exactly where you should be standing within reason and say, this is where there's a problem. Go here, as opposed to that, or just say, hey, it is with DHCP or DNS. That's where you should focus your energy. So that's what it does, is it saves 80% of your time in trying to solve a problem.
Well, I think if we brought into the AI portion of this a feedback loop from the engineers on the ground that said, I did this, and then feed that back into your engine. So, here's your recommendation. Here's what the engineer on site did. You have the data to show the net effect, and then your learning algorithms can then even learn more.
Yeah, that is basically happening this year with Voyance. So that recommendation engine in beta is going into production in a bigger way coming up very shortly. And those are the kind of things you can expect.
Cool stuff. We like it. Well, thanks for spending some time with us today, GT. And hopefully we'll see you at other conferences or on the nets in the future.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Keith.
How would anyone track you down if they wanted to get you on social media or whatever, however you want people to find you?
Sure. I'm on Twitter at GTHill. Obviously, you guys can always email me, gt@nyansa.com. I would love to hear from people. And again, I appreciate you having me, Keith. It's been a great time.
Thanks for your time.
Divergent Dynamics with Devin Akin.
In the U.S. regulatory domain, is there ever a case to use channels other than 1, 6, and 11? If yes, when?
No. And I'm sure that some technologist somewhere could say, oh, well, there's this one-off use case. But the answer is, even in the one-off use cases, this is still not a good idea. Let me give you the only use case that I've ever encountered that made any sense at all. But it's a stretch. So I'll give it to you just to say that I want to be complete here in my answer. But in that use case is in a VHD 2.4 gigahertz environment. And so for just to give you an example, Ruckus has a feature. Ruckus Wireless has a feature called Channel Fly. Channel Fly is a feature whereby, whether it be 5 gig or 2.4, can move the access points channel continually for a time, especially when it first starts up. It will be aggressive in moving the channel, and it brings the clients with it through channel switch announcements that allow the access point to assess in a real-world environment, meaning the clients are moving data, of course, uplink and downlink, and the access point will then assess the channel for available airtime, errors, and things like this. It will then move to the next channel, doing the same until it finally settles on which channel it thinks is the best at that time. Then it will become less aggressive and finally slow down, settle down, and pick some channels that it likes for that environment. Now, this is when I call it a one-off, it's not super often that you're counting on 2.4 gigahertz to work in a very high density of VHD environment. If you're talking Times Square, sure. If you're talking stadiums or arenas, while we may, use 2.4 in those environments, we don't count on it too much, right? You get what you get. And if you don't get very good, well, then you know that going in. So this is a case where there are, a 0.001% use case environment for using non-1, 6, and 11, but they are so few and far between that my answer is a resounding no. Stick with 1, 6, and 11 in the U.S. Even outside the U.S., it is oftentimes a mistake to try to make a 4-channel plan, even if you have 13 channels to work with, because you end up with adjacent channel interference. You have to space the APs sufficiently far apart in order to avoid some of the tenets of ACI. There's 6 basic tenets of ACI, and one of those is the physical spacing of the access points and output power and receive sensitivity and so on. And so if you want a 4-channel plan outside the U.S., given an appropriate amount of spectral space for a 4-channel plan, then you have to physically separate the APs to help with ACI as an offset. And even then, you may not be able to do it very well. So even outside the U.S., best practice is still 1, 6, and 11. So I'll give that one a resounding no. Stick with 1, 6, and 11.
10 Talks.
Just a quick statistical review and why it matters when we're doing analysis, specifically analysis on throughput. Our end customers love to hear, you will get X, and we can't guarantee they're going to get X. We can't even guarantee, based on Vladan's little thing, you're going to get neg 67 here. Well, 75% of the time you might get neg 67 there. But even if you get neg 67, what modulation are you going to end up using? And that's a decision that the client makes based on what he sees at the moment. So same RSSI, same number of spatial streams could result in a wide range of different things. Well, if we look at just min, max, and averages, this is just a set of data I put together with 25 data points to exaggerate an issue. And the issue looks something like this. If I have 2 sets of data, they both have identical averages. And if you look at them in this form, you go, yep, green line, blue line, same min, same max, same average. But they have a different standard deviation. And as soon as I say the word standard deviation, and probably when Vladan's little thing had the little standard deviation symbol, your eyes glazed over and went, I don't want to talk about that. But it matters. If we take the same 2 sets of data and we sort them first, rather than just leaving them random, we sort them from high to low. These 2 sets of data have the same average, but they're different. One has the red line has a very consistent set, even though they average out to the same place. The red line's more consistent than the blue line. Which one would you want to have for your throughput test? Red or blue? Okay, that was. Were you supposed to raise your hands? Red or blue? It's a choice. I mean, it's like red, blue. He's over here going, I don't know. So what we're after is not just the data we collect, but of the data we do collect, how can we show it so it shows a little better information? Something that we can then talk to our customers and say, this solution we gave you is more stable. We have a more stable solution than one. They both give you the same average. One's just a better solution. Another thing I wanted to drop off, and by the way, these are just things I had on my website just to go pull up. This one is, we're having a discussion the other day about Proxim 84, 94s, and consistency. So I did a test. It was a very rainy day. Somehow when I get stuck in rainy days in hotels and I can't go anywhere, I do weird tests. One, I was in Vilnius, and I came up with a test between baseline and other things. This one was in Jakarta on a rainy Sunday. And I had a bunch of NICs with me. I had 15 NIC 8494s, and I've been trying to use the same NIC, the same label, and the same position for a long time to be. But I wanted to say, well, I say that, but let's get some data. So I took them and I set it up with a system where I could gather 2,000 pieces of information in a 2-minute period. That's a lot of data. So you're going to see on the screens, they're really close together. And it looks something like this. So I took 3 NICs and put them in a USB hub. They're about 5 centimeters apart, 1, 2, 3, so about that far apart, and ran their data sets. Are they consistent? Well, I'm looking at it going, well, B and C, and those were positions B and C. Oh, by the way, to make sure that this was there, I went down to the front desk and got some tape, and I taped the USB hub to a spot on the desk so it didn't move. I put the AP on a place and then taped it down so it didn't move. And I moved so that my body was in between the 2 sets so nothing was interfering with this data. And obviously about a 5 dB average difference. And I went, oh, I wonder if it's the NIC in A or the position of A. So I reran the data again. And here is the data, and I moved them and rotated them around. And I moved them to reverse. So now it's C, which used to be in position A. So when wrong way. So here, number 1 was in the A slot. Here, number 1 was in the C slot. Pretty obvious that now we have, it's that NIC. It's not the position. Well, what if I test all my NICs? Well, realizing I'm thinking maybe there's a position might make a difference. Let's do now this is what took a long time. I only used 1 position. And I retested all 15 NICs over and over and over, and each of them was in the exact same position, 2,000 data points. And so NIC C is about 7 dB lower than NIC A. And as you look at these, they're not consistent. They're same brand, same NIC. A bunch of them are within 1 MAC address of each other. They're consecutive because I bought them as a group. And we look at that and go, yeah. So what do we do about it?
Buy a sidekick.
That Sidekick's trying to address this issue, but everybody can't buy a Sidekick. So what can we do? I mean, that was an actual legitimate question. Divide it by 3. So which NIC should I be doing my tests on?
3 of them.
Which 3?
Select 3.
Select 3 and then, yeah. So I had this one NIC that was my primary NIC that I had been using for a long time, and it had a label on it. I labeled it instructor, and it was the one I would test with because it was my best one. I'd done this test earlier, and it was I want it. And then it ran into a door one day, all by itself. It just jumped out and hit the door. I don't know how it happened, but it now has a little rattle to it. And they're not supposed to rattle. and see if you can see which one it is. It's C. The one that was my favorite. And now it's like 5 dB lower. Like, do I use it or not use it? So when we're testing, we live in these worlds of absolutes. We're going to measure to neg 65 on primary, neg 67 on secondary, and have an SNR of 25. And if we even miss it up, we're not going to, TAC won't even answer our call because they say, you're not meeting Cisco specs. And we're down in these precision numbers, and yet our NICs are floaty, floaty, floaty. So know your NICs and compare yours, and then the best we can hope for is to compensate. We can't calibrate these NICs. There's no calibration possible. Even on the Sidekicks production process, they don't calibrate. They compensate to a gold standard. We just don't have them in our industry. It doesn't matter if it's these or the ones inside your laptops. We ran a test at WOPC in Phoenix. iPhone 6, iPhone 6, iPhone 6, iPhone 6 with a standard deviation of 5 dB. That's the standard deviation. That means they had a 10 dB swing, same brand, same NIC, on a same jig placed on the same table in the same orientation. And we're out there telling our customers, I'm gonna guarantee your. And then our customers say, well, we want all phones, all laptops, anything that's ever Wi-Fi to always work. So we live in this world of absolutes and non-absolutes at the same time.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Wireless LAN Professionals Podcast, the podcast for wireless LAN professionals by wireless LAN professionals. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Wireless LAN Pros for all the latest news and updates, and also connect directly with Keith on Twitter at Keith R. Parsons. Head over to www.wlanpros.com for this episode's show notes, as well as the latest in all things Wi-Fi.